Dynamesh is one of the main modes of working in ZBrush, and it's totally different from subdivision or ZModeler workflows. Basically, it works by breaking a model down into little boxes like 3D pixels. It's kind of hard to put into words, so let's just get right into the demonstration. So let's say you've got a model and you want to make some big sculpting changes to it. Maybe you want to bring out the ears and make the ears just really big. And so let's just go ahead and stretch these out. Now what you'll notice is that it's really starting to stretch out these polygons. They're getting really pulled. And you can sort of get around this by subdividing. If I just hit Control D a couple times, you'll notice, you can kind of get some of that smoothness back, but it's always going to be an issue. For example, if you try to sculpt on this with a standard brush, for example, BST, you can kind of sculpt here, but when you try to sculpt on these areas, things get a little bit strange. So a solution for this is to use dynamesh. So let's go down to our geometry subpalette and let's open up dynamesh. So there's several options here, but the two most important ones are the resolution and then the dynamesh button, which actually initializes it. So let's just see what happens if we use the default resolution. So real quick about this pop-up, if your model has subdivision levels, it's going to ask you if you would like to freeze subdivision levels. This is kind of an advanced, complicated thing. I always do no here. Okay, so let's take a look at what this did to our wireframe. I'll hit Shift F to turn on wireframe. So you can see that it's basically evened out the entire topology into little squares and triangles. Now if I hit Control Z to show what that looked like before, you can see we had more of an animation type topology. And then Control Shift Z to go forward in the undo. This is what it looks like after dynamesh. So let's undo this and try a different resolution. So let's try something a little lower, maybe about 72. And then we'll just hit no again. And so you can see now all of these polygons are quite a bit bigger because it's lower resolution. So if we undo this again, you could crank this up quite high, and if you go really high, you might end up crashing your computer. So I recommend stepping up, maybe doubling each time, just to make sure you're not overtaxing your computer. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that dynamesh is size dependent. So if we go to the size subpalette here, you can see that the height of this model is about 4.5 units tall. Now, ZBrush likes to work with objects that are in the range of roughly 1 to 5 units tall. I mean, you can have a model of any size, but dynamesh in particular really likes models to be in the neighborhood of 1 to 5 units tall. So what happens if we shrink this model way down? And let's turn on solo mode to hide those eyes for right now. So we shrink this model down to maybe like 0.1, and then we go back to dynamesh, and we use that same resolution it was on by default, is 128. And let's zoom in here on this, just hit F to zoom in, and let's do dynamesh again. And click no. So you'll notice that this model is much smaller, and so the resolution is much lower. So this is something to keep in mind to check the size of your model. If it's really small, you might want to increase that resolution really high. Now, if you have a really large model, say over 30, 40 units in maximum dimension, then you're going to want to set that dynamesh resolution really low. Okay, so those are the basics of dynamesh. You can see it's really good for evening out topology. And it actually does a lot more. We'll get into that later on in this chapter.